Welcome to season 1, episode 1 of the Director's Chair. I'm your host, Cody House, and with me in this first season will be my co-host, Kevin Pauley, and occasional guest,
Hello.
Colin Smith. Welcome, guys.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And our director of season 1 topic is going to be Mr. David Lynch. And normally we're doing something a little different than what we normally do on the show, where we take a director and do their entire filmography. This kind of started with Kevin. You had commented when I think Chris posted something about what horror films should we talk about, and you posted Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. And I was like, oh, that'd be cool. I was like, would you be down to talk the show? And you said, sure. And of course, the reason I thought of that is because if you're going to talk about that movie, you got to kind of have to go into the TV show. And even though we are going to eventually get to the films of David Lynch, I feel like David Lynch is not the first or last filmmaker to be so creatively involved in a television series that has their print on it, but I feel like this is the most auteur-driven TV show ever produced on television.
And it also maybe I think has the distinction of really starting that. Like, there's a lot of commentary out there that says that without Twin Peaks, we may not have had so much of the television landscape that we think about from the 2000s and 2010s, and just all the auteur television and prestige television, because it's really sort of opened the door for a lot of that. And certainly, I think there's a good case to be made for that as well, that it was one of the first real cinematic and auteur television series to get any kind of mainstream attention. There may have been some mini-series or events that happened, but TV felt a lot different before this, that maybe that this opened opportunities for there to be the kind of TV that we now, watch fairly regularly.
Yeah, I think the big thing, this wasn't just TV, this wasn't just a TV show. This was like a movie each week. This was like a 1-hour piece of cinema with commercials thrown in that you got to have every week. So this was something that was really groundbreaking, just from the look of it, the feel of it, the atmosphere of it. And I think too, there's so many shows, when you look at the 90s, there are so many shows that were influenced by it. A big one to me will always be, of course, Northern Exposure took a lot of that try to take that sort of wittiness and that quirkiness. They even have a joke where they actually saw through a telescope, they were looking across the river or whatever, and they saw a lady with a log in her hand. And when I'm like, that's cute. But like, I think too, another show that we don't really get if we don't have Twin Peaks is the X-Files.
Yes.
Which was a tremendously popular show. And again, a very cinematic show, episodic, the building mystery all throughout each season. And I really do. And of course, you've also got Dennis Denise, showing up as Fox. So I think, again, the impact of Twin Peaks really, and if you weren't around in 1990, I don't think you can really quite understand how big this was. I was 14 going on 15 when this came on, and it literally blew me away. I genuinely couldn't compare it to anything. It was like my mind was getting blown every single week. I had known David Lynch from The Elephant Man and Dune, which, I know I'm in the minority. I love Dune. I absolutely love Dune. It's what got me to read the book, and I love the film. And of course, so I knew him from those things. And then so when Twin Peaks came on, I'm like, man, I know this. And of course, Blue Velvet, I knew the name. And so then it was just like, man, this is really groundbreaking. And even, my 15-year-old brain was like, yeah, I know I'm watching something special. It's not just funny. It's not just quirky. There are so many layers to it. Now, granted, in high school, I didn't get all those layers, but the great thing about rewatching a show like this is you will pick up something new every time you watch it. A certain character will ring differently, certain lines will ring differently. And especially when you've seen everything through The Return, it's really amazing the little things that are planted in this first season, which is arguably, I really can make the argument, this is maybe the greatest first season of television I've about ever seen. The 8 episodes you get for this season are all killer, no filler. It is just, I mean, every episode is building to the next big thing. This was like, for the longest time, like this was the water cooler discussion show. Like this was your water cooler TV. This is where everybody was on Monday morning. You know, they were by the water cooler. Oh my God, what did you think of that? And it's just, I love the fact that we get to explore this kind of in bits and pieces, taking, you know, a couple of episodes at a time, because there is so much going on in each episode, especially this pilot. Man, this pilot does some heavy lifting and does it impressively. But it's so great to be able to talk about this. And if you've not watched Twin Peaks, I hope that we'll spark your maybe desire to want to at least watch it. If you've heard about it, but you never really knew if it was for you or not, I'll just say this: if you like Lynch, you can't help but like Twin Peaks. And if you like mysteries and comedy and soap opera and, you know, like crime drama and all of this mixed together, you know, that's Twin Peaks. It is an absolute melting pot of pop culture, and it wears that proudly on its sleeve. Watching it again 2 nights ago, I was watching the pilot again, and I'm like, man, the soap opera structure is so there. It's very soap operatic, and I love that because the soundtrack, it really just, you know, Laura Palmer's theme is one of my favorite pieces of music ever composed, and it's just, every time you hear it, you're just like, yeah, they're really digging into that soap opera thing, and I love it. So this is really exciting for me to get to be a part of this, because I love this show. It's my favorite of all time, and its influence is still being felt to this day. And it's just, to me, it's a show that rewards you every time you go back and watch it. You know, I mean, I was telling you guys earlier, I've got, you know, my trading cards from 1990. They're still wrapped in plastic. I've got The Secret Diary of Laura Palmer, written by David Lynch's daughter. It's, you know, everything from the show is in there. You know, my Funko Pop, Agent Cooper. Like, it's just one of those shows that I'm so glad I got to grow up with. And it's one of those shows I'm so glad to always get to go back and revisit. So this is exciting stuff, man.
I'm glad you mentioned the soap opera aspect, because I think one of the things too, again, if you're looking at it from modern eyes, it might be different. But at the time, throughout the 80s, the soap opera was the dominant nighttime television form.
Oh,
right?
Dallas, Dynasty, Knots Landing,
a whole bunch of them. And they were, you know, there was the whole Who Shot JR?
Who Shot JR, baby, earlier. Yeah.
Like it was the prestige. They were the ones winning the Emmys. There was Hill Street Blues that sort of was a variation,
which Mark Frost actually wrote for.
Yes,
so
exactly.
Cool.
Yeah,
he was able to take that to Twin Peaks. Yeah,
and I think that one of the things that's so fascinating is that, because with Lynch's sensibility and his desire to always explore the darkness underneath the surface of American life, that the soap opera genre was actually quite ideal for him to jump into. Yes. And I think that that's part of what makes the magic work.
He really took the piss out of the nighttime dramas, man. He did. He took the piss out of it in all the best ways. But I think that's one of the best things about Twin Peaks is if you'd watch Blue Velvet, Blue Velvet really kind of feels like the blueprint for what he was going to do with Twin Peaks. That's that life that you know it, and then you scratch underneath the surface to that really nasty real life underneath it. Yeah. The facade goes away, and then you realize that every place, no matter how pristine and how white the picket fences are, every place has a dark side. Every body has a dark side, and this show was very eager to just throw us into that. And the other thing I love so much about the pilot is it really just throws you into the world. There's no hand holding. It's just you are thrown right into it, right out the gates. There is a dead body, and you don't know who any of these people are, and the mystery starts unfolding right there. And it's breakneck. I mean, it really is. It's amazing how many characters you're introduced to in just the pilot alone. And what's always interesting to me too is the specter of Laura Palmer, you know, that hangs over the show. I mean, we never really get to see Laura Palmer other than her photo and like some flashbacks, but she's not a regular character in the show, and yet she's the most important character in the show. And it's really interesting how they were able to do that. You know, Lynch absolutely loved Laura Palmer. Like, he really loves that character, and it shows. But it's really amazing how you can take all those different sensibilities, you know, from all those references of pop culture up to that point, and just make it all work in this quirky, weird, dark, spooky, funny world. I'll say this, it's responsible for, I think, two of the scariest things I've ever seen on television are in this show. And really and truly, and we'll get to this episode, but when you get to the second season and the reveal of who the murderer of Laura Palmer was, that single episode, I still to this day don't know how that got on network television. Like, I still watch that and I'm like, how on earth did something this scary, this vicious, this brutal, this intense, how is this on a network TV show? Like, it is like, man, it's amazing the ground that was broken and the boundaries that were pushed with this show.
Yeah, I think you guys have hit a lot of great topics that we're going to be talking about throughout this series as we talk the entire show and even further works. I want to caveat that if you have not watched Twin Peaks before and you're listening in or watching us, we may possibly spoil things, so maybe watch each episode at least before you listen if you want to. And, you know, I'm not going to know when the spoilers drop, just beware, but it could happen. So if you want to watch the show on your own time and come back and watch as we do these, do that. But yeah, Colin, I think, you know, this show does get heavily mentioned as like kind of the first show to be considered of that prestigious TV that would come. Because this is before HBO really took over like nighttime dramas, right? This is almost a decade before The Sopranos, about 7 or 8 years before Oz. And I think HBO had done some series, but they hadn't quite gotten the prestige they would get in the next decade or two. And this is kind of where
not at that
TV. Yeah, and this is kind of where TV shows start becoming less procedural and become more like, oh, I gotta watch this every week, because this is before DVRs. Like, I guess some people were recording on VHS if they couldn't watch it, but you know, this is before DVR or, you know, streaming or on demand, so you had to be home
passing VHS cassettes around. So I was this came out my senior year of high school. I was the age the characters were, that Laura Palmer and that generation of the characters were. In fact, I was looking it up on the trading cards because they leave the characters' birthdays. So the actors are actually older than me, but of course they're playing characters that were that were my age, and so there was that sort of aspect of it. But I remember people passing VHS tapes around so people could watch it and going back through it and looking at that grainy VHS, like pausing it and looking for details and looking for clues and just all of that kind of and again, I mean, with my age, maybe I didn't know it, but there wasn't that kind of energy and excitement for TV shows. Like, now it's more common, whether it's Game of Thrones or The Sopranos, or you could name a whole, list of shows, all the reality shows that people follow and talk about online. There's all that kind of buzz, but at the time it felt like something different. Like, I think before, again, there were events, like maybe like I referenced the Who Shot JR, but there weren't sort of sustained ongoing obsession with rewatching details and that there were. And this was the first time I think there was any of that.
I think another thing this show kind of generates, and maybe it takes a couple of decades to realize, but not only is it influencing on and taking a kind of a piss out of the soap opera style of television show, but this show had to have a huge influence on what now people are obsessed with like the true crime docuseries and podcasts, because this very much has that.
The big
and what's
thing
interesting about that,
like,
go ahead.
I remember like the magazine ads, like in Premiere Magazine and stuff, and TV Guide, the big ad that was like, who killed Laura Palmer? Find out, the journey starts tonight, whatever. I mean, like, it was like a big event. This pilot was a massive event. ABC was really, putting some money into it and really believed in what the potential was that was there. It really was like, again, like Laura Palmer, that picture was all over the place. The show, there were books, there were magazine articles, and we were all grabbing everything we could to try to find it. Man, are they going to reveal something in this magazine article? Is there going to be something there that we didn't catch? I mean, it really is funny how everybody became a detective. Everybody became Agent Cooper in their own right, trying to figure out who did what. And the great thing about the structure of this show was, yeah, you wanted to find out who killed Laura Palmer, but then there are all these other relationships that you want to find out what's going on with them. How are they going to get out of this situation? What's going to happen, like, with Leo and Shelley and Bobby? What's going to happen there? What's going to happen, with James and Donna? Like, you're just wondering, like, these other things that are going on are just as important to you as the murder of Laura Palmer. And they're all connected, sure, but the fact that these individual storylines are just as important to you as a viewer as the actual core part of the mystery itself is really impressive when you think about that. Like, you've got your A level story, but then your B, C, D, and E stories are still just as interesting in their own rights. Those characters are just as interesting, and we want to know what's going to happen to them. We know all of it sort of interconnects to the main murder, which, again, that's brilliant structuring. But I love the fact that we were all just as invested in the relationships and who was going to end up with who. Again, the soap opera aspects of it really coming through. It's to me, that's one of the really fun things about Twin Peaks, is that there's no bad character. There are characters you may hate because of how horrible they are. Catherine Martell, looking at you. But it's definitely a thing where every character is interesting. They're all interesting. You want to know what's going on, what machinations are going on in this backwoods little town. Why is this lumber mill so damn important? There's all these things. What's with the Norwegians? Are they coming back? Like, it's all these wonderful little things that get, set up. And the great thing is there's payoffs all over the place, and I know the second season, and we'll eventually get to that, it does have some moments where it drags, but it's also still got some of my favorite moments in the history of the series. There's some really amazing cinematic moments. There's some amazing characters, some amazing dialogue. Some of the best things I've ever seen on television are in the second season of Twin Peaks. But with these first two episodes, what was really fun revisiting it was it still feels fresh, and it still kind of feels like a show that we're still not quite ready for. And I love that. I love that about it. That's something shot in 1989, released in 1990, still feels fresh, and it still holds up against anything that you would want to put on a television right now. I would still, watch Twin Peaks over almost any other show on TV, even if it's something I've never seen before. I'd still rather go back and spend my time in Twin Peaks because I know that there are things there that I'm going to get rewarded for. I love revisiting those characters. Agent Cooper is one of my favorite, characters in the history of pop culture, not just television, but just pop culture in general. And to me, that's what's so interesting about Twin Peaks, is that everybody's on their A game. Every character is interesting. Every performance is fantastic. You've got all of this beautiful atmosphere. That's another thing. The town is very much a character in and of itself. Those beautiful shots of the Great Northern and the waterfall, the beautiful shots of the Packard sawmill. I mean, they really are great shots, again, because it's shot cinematically. It's the Double R Diner. It's such a warm, cozy place. Like, you want to go there. You want to get a cup of coffee and you want to try this cherry pie that everybody's so crazy about. Those are the things that I love about the show. I mean, yes, the core mystery is really interesting, and it's very intense and very creepy, and it's great, especially when you're first watching it, trying to put all the pieces together. But it's so great that you can go back and watch it again and still get just as much out of it, because in the end, it was cool to find out, what was going on with the murder, but it's not the most important thing as to why you watch Twin Peaks. It's really those characters and those relationships, that atmosphere. It just makes it something you just want to get lost back into it.
I'd like to touch on something that you were talking about there, because I think that is, like, from everything that I've read, my understanding is that the murder was not what the creators of the show actually were fascinated with. They wanted to introduce this into the town, and the murder.
They never wanted to reveal it. That was the
and
whole
they never.
thing.
That's right.
Yeah, they never
wanted to reveal it. Lynch really wanted.
And it's so funny to think that was going to be the case.
Yeah, but I mean, when you look at the pilot, Cheryl Lee's character, Laura Palmer, is listed down below some of the named, minor extra characters because she was considered so irrelevant to sort of the main plot. Because the idea really was to get people hooked into this town and the ongoing drama, never solve mystery. And what I think is really interesting about that is the way that fate is like so much about just how different machinations took this TV series in different directions than it was ever sort of really intended to go, and led to there's so many happy accidents from Bob accidentally being in the mirror to the European pilot ending being incorporated into the dream sequence, like so many little things that took this series in a different direction, that it's interesting that a murder that was just really sort of a MacGuffin to get people hooked into this series ends up becoming a truly, I think, powerful and very just profound exploration of domestic violence and about feminism in ways that nobody planned or intended, and just because of the different ways things went. Like by the time Lynch was making the movie, he became just so much more interested in Laura Palmer in different ways than sort of was ever intended for this during the filming of this pilot. So I just think there's just so much interesting about how this went down that changed the direction of things and really impacted so much about what this story ended up being.
Yes, it definitely is one of those things where, when you know where it's going, going back and watching the pilot, it's amazing. First of all, it's amazing how quaint and cozy the pilot feels. Yes. When you've seen the return.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Especially. Oh, sorry. I was going to say, especially because if once we get to the return, and that is full Lynchian, existentialism. This is a much more straightforward.
Yeah, that's what's
plot.
Funny. That's what I was going to say. This feels very like normal.
Yes.
To the return, and that's fine. It's great. But I think what's really still great about that pilot, though, and I guess this is as good a point to start talking about the pilot. Like the pilot, I just love the fact that again, right out the gates, you're just sucked right in. Like you see the body, off to the side, wrapped in plastic, and Pete Martell just wanting to go out and fish. That's all he wanted to do. Bless his heart. Bless his little heart. We all love Pete. He's great. He's just wonderful. But it's like, you get this little banter with him and Josie, the top of the morning and all that's really great. Really just charming. And then boom, murder. And then what's really interesting, of course, is the murder gets built up. Like, wait, we found a body. We need to find out who this is. We need to turn it over. And then suddenly this takes a really dark turn when it's a high school, homecoming queen.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, you can see the nature of this is so, the nature of the attack is so perverse. It's so horrific. And you suddenly start realizing, we all kind of laugh at Andy, bless his heart, when he starts crying because he just can't handle it. Bless Andy's heart. Again, wonderful character. I love Andy so much. But it's like, suddenly you start realizing, like, this isn't just like a murder. This is something different. And in a small town like that, and growing up in Appalachia, I really could appreciate that. If something like that would have happened at my high school, like, it would have shocked like our little world, man. Like it really and truly would have been the most horrific thing, and as it should be. And I love how Cooper at one point even talks about how life means more here. It really does. It means a life means something more here, and you really get that right out the gates with the discovery of Laura Palmer. I love that it really does allow you, through the characters and their reaction and the music. God, can we just say Angela Badalamenti's score for this show is one for the ages. It's brilliant. Laura Palmer's theme, man, hits me every time.
Yeah, you guys. Go ahead. I was going to say,
go ahead, Cody. I got you.
Talking about the score. I mean, you already brought it up, but yeah, the whole Laura Palmer theme, and even like some of the themes with the certain characters, because when we get introduced to Big Ed and Peggy, and like it's all very soap opera-y, and but also there's like
kind of vibe as well.
There's a little bit of like 50s doo-wop with some jazz in there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Depending
I mean,
on where
itself is beautiful. God, I mean, and especially if you've listened to the version where Julie Cruz, sings the lyrics to it, it's a stunning piece of music. My God, it's heart-wrenching and beautiful. But that theme, when it comes in at that point, when you see the reactions on the faces of Sheriff Truman and Doc Hayward, you start realizing, man, this is bad. Like this is really something intense. Like, right out the gate, suddenly this was a very important character, even though we don't know who the hell Laura Palmer is at this point. We know this is tragic. And knowing that this happened to a girl, knowing that she was found bound, and then when you actually hear the report of what happened to her, that's like, that's like we talked about the domestic violence and stuff. That stuff wasn't being talked about in network television.
Right.
That wasn't ever discussed in network television. And suddenly here we are right out the gates in this pilot, and it's the main focus. And so that really, it's interesting. When I watched it as a teen, you watch things differently the first time. You're on a different level of it. So I was just appreciating the atmosphere of it, the performances. Really, Andy cracked me up with his breakdown, and everybody just looking at him like, again. So obviously this is not the first time that Andy has done this at the site of the crime. And but it's like going back and rewatching it as you get older, and you can start, and you get, obviously the more you watch movies and the more you watch any TV and stuff, like, you start appreciating things more. You start picking up on things like, composition of a shot and the way the music is used and sound and all that good stuff. And especially with David Lynch, he's just got certain things he always goes to. And for me, like this scene, it's amazing now when I watch it, just how gripping it is, just how tragic it is, how sad it is. I still kind of get a little chuckle at Andy, but it goes away really quick because of the way that everything is handled there, the weight of this scene. It really still resonates. And again, this is 33 years later, man, and it still resonates.
Well, I think it gets even more as the pilot goes on, as you start to see the impact and the connections that Laura had to the whole community, and you start to see how many people are affected. I mean, it goes to her parents. I always found that scene hard, the scene with her mom hard to watch.
I was going to say how Grace Lewinsky didn't win every Emmy under the sun for her work in that pilot. Jesus H, man. Like, it's... when she's like holding that phone screaming, when she knows what Leland has heard, like, God damn, man, you feel that. Like,
well, and it hits different after, now after having watched The Return, and maybe understanding might be, because there's many ways to interpret different things, but understanding all that Leland and like how much they knew about what was going on or were in denial of it, hits even harder. But I think as we, but then you get into the school scene and you see Donna's face and you see the girl, like that scene of the girl goes screaming
across the yard.
That scene always sends a chill down my,
so
haunting.
And the principal not wanting to have to address it, even though it's his job, because the teacher gets,
that could have been a thankless part.
Yeah,
but that actor sells the shit out of that scene,
doesn't he? And I know he's a character actor that I've seen in a bajillion things.
Yeah, but that and the teacher, her homeroom teacher, you see it in her face. You see some of the extras in the class. I mean, you see the interactions between Donna and James. You see, I still think Audrey's face during that scene is really amazing as well. Watching Sharon Fenn sort of react and not react, and just because of what we again find out later about the complicated, feelings she might have about Laura. Like, there's just so much that just it just spreads from, and that whole opening sequence is just like that whole, like, it's not even it's a multiple sequences, but just the impact that you get right away of the loss that this is, so that it's not. But also too, it's weekly murder.
There's little moments peppered in too where you start getting to the quirkiness of it. Because the one scene that always makes me laugh is that kid who break dances his way out of the scene after he closes his locker. Like that is one of the most awesome, bizarre shots. I love that it exists. I have no idea why it does, but I absolutely love that it exists, and I'm here for it. But again, it's even in these moments of seriousness, there is these little quirky things spliced in, And there's just so much payoff with that. And I love that. I love so much that there's those little things. Again, Lynch really is layering every scene. I mean, from the foreground to the background, there are things going on. And the great thing is, if you catch it, that's great. If you don't, that's okay. It doesn't detract from your understanding of anything, but it just really helps just expand upon the weirdness and quirkiness that's also there, you know, with what this world is. I love that it's like life kind of on its ear the whole time, and it's wonderful. But
there's early on, there's the scene with Lucy trying to explain it, or like in such a long-winded way to the sheriff which phone she's going to send the call to. Like,
oh my god, that sequence is just like, brilliant, man.
Super.
Jesus.
And I guess there's actually, you can see Lynch in the reflection of the glass in front of her, which I had not picked up to until very recently. But there, but yeah, the balance between the emotional impact that he is laying on us and some of the, and I don't want to call it comic relief, because I don't think that's just what it is. I do think it helps break up some of the tension of the intensity of this loss, but it really is Lynch creating this world that is just slightly off from what we're used to, but maybe perhaps even that much closer to the real world than we see depicted on TV, because the real world is so quirky and random and filled with bizarre characters, right? So,
and there are people that will go on a diatribe about explaining something simple as like, I'm going to transfer you over to this phone. That's just real life. And I think you
also appreciate though Michael Ontkean's reaction to that, the deadpan reaction he gives that entire thing.
Well, I mean, God bless Sheriff Harry Truman. It looks like he's got to deal with that all the time in his department with her and Andy, and even what is the other officer's name? Hawk. You know, these are all and then just the various different characters throughout the town of Twin Peaks. Like when him and Agent Cooper go to the Martells and Pete's like, don't drink that coffee, there's a fish in there.
Right.
Like, how did a fish get in the percolator?
Yeah.
Well, and he's prepared because of the kind of what he's sort of used to dealing with his town. He's prepared for when Cooper arrives, because Cooper brings his own quirkiness to Twin Peaks. And one of the things that is so great about their relationship is the fact that Truman just rolls with it and accepts it and moves on with it.
But the other side of that is the respect that he gets from Cooper. That Agent Cooper comes in and respects every man and woman in that town. Like, that's something that I love so much about Cooper, is he is the eternal optimist. And I love the fact that he appreciates the little things, like the trees. What are those wonderful trees? And Douglas fir. Like, he's so like a 5-year-old about it. It's brilliant. It's wonderful.
The pie, how excited he is to tell Diane about the pie. Yeah.
But it's at the same time, like when he comes in and he's a straight shooter with Harry, he's like, look, this is how it's going to be. The FBI is involved, so that means I'm in charge. A lot of people don't like that, so let's just go ahead and get it out of the way. And Harry's like I said, we're glad to have you here. And from right there, that bromance starts, and it's wonderful, and I'm here for it. Like the two of them together, and then of course bringing in the Bookhouse Boys. Yeah, it's. But
I do think it's interesting rewatching the pilot, because I do think there was a bit of a tonal shift into the first season. I think that there is a darker edge to Cooper in the pilot than there is in a lot of the rest of season 1. That is interesting. Like, he's a bit more, and maybe it's that he's not as connected to the town yet, but there is a bit more of his like fascination with the grisly details that, that maybe as an investigator helps in his work. I do find there's a bit of a darker edge to him that we don't see as much of again until the return. And but he still has a balance of those things. He's got that sort of gleeful embracing of the simple things and the beauty that he comes across, and the respect for the town and the appreciation he has for the characters there. But there's also a bit of a darker side, and I appreciate seeing that in the pilot, because I think that helps with the later things that we see in all the way into the return.
Well, I think that's just the power of McLaughlin as a performer, because I think so. He has those at this time in his life. He has that all-American boy next door look, but there is a darker edge to him, which helps to be in these type of movies. Like, he was the lead in Dune and Blue Velvet, and Blue Velvet's similar, not as quirky of a character, but it's very similar to the acting style, I think, of Michael Keaton in a lot of ways. Like, there's a quirkiness, but there's also like a darkness.
Well, let's not forget, he's also an alien. I mean, if you've seen the name, he's an alien special agent. So that's what it is. It's got to be that. So
he's got that. He's got it nailed that I don't think too many actors could like go between those two extreme opposites and do it so well.
Make it feel natural. No, it's tough.
Yeah,
he always feels like a perfect balance, and it's the thing I like about Cooper is that he's a genuinely sweet character. He really cares about people, but he is constantly riding that line that if something were to go wrong, that man would kill people. Like that guy's got bodies on his hands. Like, and I love that he makes that shit too.
And they're already
he's like the smartest guy in the room. Like I always love that about Cooper. He's always the smartest guy in the room. He's always one step ahead. Like the interrogation scene with Bobby and Mike, where he's just got he's been whittling on his little flute there, and he's just like, well, then I guess you're free to go. But you better pray for the safety of James Hurley.
Right.
Well, he's interrogating him like, you're supposed to if you think someone's a suspect, but that whole time he's like writing to Truman, he's like, he's not the one. He didn't do it.
He's not the one.
He already knows that, like, he sees the motorcycle and the reflection in the videotape, and they're all like, oh my, wow, because he's really good at his job on top of, being this kind of quirky guy that's very enthusiastic about everything.
Yeah, and you're right. It is well balanced. You don't feel that these contradictions are not. You don't feel that they are contradictions in his character. You see, he manages to integrate them well into a way that it all feels natural. The different sides of him, the different aspects that he brings to it, and all of that. Whereas maybe another actor might not have been able to pull that off. I think he does an excellent.
I think there's a lot of characters you can look at in Twin Peaks that if this were not given the gravitas that it should have been given, which luckily it did. This could have been very much like a daytime soap opera.
Yes.
Like it could have been very, forced, very static, really cheap. And it's not. It's not in any way, shape, or form. Everything, whatever budget they have for the show, it's on screen. And it's not just the look of the show. It's not just the costume stuff. It's also the performers. They got fine actors and actresses to do the work. And everybody's perfectly cast. I couldn't imagine recasting anyone in that show. There is not one person that I'm like, oh, you should totally, who could have been a better, Big Ed. No, there's no.
But the interesting about that is that
it's just that kind of thing.
Interesting about that is that that the character of Josie was recast because it wasn't going to originally be Joan Chen. Who was it going to be? Now I'm blanking on it, but
I'm blanking on it too.
But
it's not her.
But again, they reworked the character in a way once they brought in Joan Chen and then she made it her own, right? So many of the characters like Audrey and Shelley were there because they auditioned for another part. I don't know if it was Donna or who, but they liked them so much that they created these characters for them. And of course that spills out into really interesting, like imagine the show without Audrey. It just does.
Right.
I was going to say, I can't think of anyone but Sherilyn Fenn for that role. And
the original script of the pilot had no lines for her.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And
she was a background character.
You mentioned most of the characters, being the age you were when you watched this, and most of them were older. I guess the only actor who was close to the age she was supposed to be playing is the actress that plays Shelley, because I think she's just supposed to be a year or two out of high school, right?
I think she's supposed to be the same age as the other characters, but she drops out because she marries Leo.
Okay, well, she's one of the younger actors in the show, because I think she's only like 19 or 20 at the time.
Right.
Which is funny because now she's gone full-fledged back into the not quite as good of a show, but definitely in the vein of doing a soap opera with dark underbellies. She's Betty's mom in Riverdale.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and there's an interesting character you just mentioned too, and that's Leo Johnson. Like, man, like he is a scary character. Like watching it again, I'm just like, man, he is genuinely a terrifying character. And it's so funny, like, I remember when the show was on, like everybody was certain that he had to be the killer. Like, just mainly because he's an asshole. Because it's like, well, it has to be him. Look, he did to Shelley with the bar of soap and the sock. Like, it's got to be Leo. It has to be him. And it's so funny. Like, people hated him so much. And Eric DeRay, from all accounts, seems like a pretty nice guy. Like, he's very quiet in any interview I've ever seen with him. But yet, Leo is one of the great bad guys, of 90s TV. Like, he is a despicable character. There are no redeeming qualities to Leo Johnson. Not one. No. And it's just, again, there in the pilot, like, I love the fact that we haven't seen Leo yet, but Bobby's taking Shelley home, and he's making
sees that truck. Yeah.
He's
scared.
The music tonally shifts. Like, the music suddenly becomes like scary. It's gone from that dun, 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 to suddenly like, whoa, and it's like, oh shit. And you haven't seen Leo. All you see is that truck. Right. And that truck is more than enough to like make this whole thing suddenly become genuinely scary. Like, holy shit, who is this guy? What is in that truck? Like, what is in that house?
It does feel like Leo's there to be the distraction, or not to be the distraction.
Oh, he's
to be
the red herring, absolutely.
Like, he was the one character I didn't suspect as being the killer, because I thought that would be too obvious.
It's too obvious, yeah. I mean,
exactly.
Because she finds the blood on his shirt, right?
Yeah, everything points to Leo, and so it's. Oh,
he is communism, man. Because communism is a red herring.
But yeah, exactly. But the thing about that's interesting is that he's he's this awful character that all the clues are sort of pointing to him. And I remember when the season finale of season 1 was advertising, the advertisement full on in the commercial was showing Sheriff Truman going, you're under arrest for the murder of Laura Palmer. So everyone thought we were going to see the killer get arrested, but instead we see Leo get arrested. And again, it turns out that that's just all a complete distraction.
Well,
I mean, he's still an interesting character. Like, they don't waste him just by making him a distraction.
Oh, God.
They actually, again, like with the show ending up being about these darker elements that go on in every small town, like the underbelly of American life, and the examination of that. I mean, Leo is, clearly he's an abuser from the beginning. We see that from the very beginning. And the show that's one of the more explicit explorations of domestic abuse that we start seeing right from the beginning. So they don't waste him. They use him quite effectively, I think, even though, like I said, most people probably didn't think that he was really going to turn out to be the killer.
Yeah, it's funny looking at the show now. Like, it really, I'd really kind of forgotten just I was gonna say the darkness of the show. Like, it's very present in that pilot. Like, it's there. I had forgotten how visually intense the reveal of Ronette Pulaski was. I'd really forgotten how much they showed of her body, like the rope marks, the burns, and her tattered dress that's barely covering anything, man. Like, that shot of her walking across the railroad tracks is horrifying, man. Because that, whatever happened to her and Laura was this was awful. And the other set piece that I really love in that pilot going into the first episode is the discovery of the train car.
Yes.
That train car looks genuinely, just from the outside in daytime. Yeah. That train car looks like a nightmare. I mean, it looks
it's
like
a nope, don't go in there.
Oh my God. And then when they actually show the inside, like the dirt, the locket and everything, like it's horrific. Like that, it really is amazing to me, like how far they were able to go with the terror of this brutal, like, rape and murder. I mean, it's the only thing you can say. This is exactly what it is. It's so brutal. And they don't shy away from that. But at the same time, they don't exploit.
Right.
Very, very critical when you're dealing with this kind of stuff. And they did a really wonderful job of walking that fine line, of making it very uncomfortable and very scary, but not exploitative. And that is not easy to do, and it takes a steady hand like David Lynch to be able to pull that off.
Yeah, because I mean, so many shows since that have become more and more graphic, don't walk that line very well. And this, I mean, some of it might have been the standards at the time, but I agree with you that they actually pushed boundaries far beyond what was being seen on network TV at the time. And the fact that any of this made it onto network TV is a bit of a miracle, I think. You're 100% right on that.
It's the same thing with like Ridley Scott knew with Alien, and that's that less is more. You know, if I show you everything, what you'll put in your brain is far more horrific than anything I could show you. That's really, again, the smart thing to do with that murder scene. Like, I don't have to see everything to know that it was awful. I don't have to see all the wounds and everything to know this was bad. Like, it's really, honestly, I love the fact that they leave a lot of that for Dr. Haywood to describe in his report on the autopsy. Because again, it brings in that
scene is so
because he
disturbing.
I delivered her, so I had to have my friend come in and do the autopsy. Like, man, that hurts.
You talk about the small townness and how everyone knows everybody, and like, at first we were going back to when they discover the body, and Doc Haywood and Sheriff Truman are like, "Come on, Andy!" But then when they flip her over, they're
like, "Oh my God, it's Laura!"
Yeah.
But that helps, I think, drive home the power of those moments. Like, for the audience who doesn't know Laura, who doesn't we're just meeting all these characters, but to have the character like Doc Haywood's reaction to having to bring somebody in and explain that, and then have him like choking up as he's reading off what was going on, like that really makes it way more powerful than it would have been if it had been some just clinical.
And the great thing is, through that, the characters are telling us what we need to know about Laura. They really let us know what she meant to that community, and that's the beautiful thing. Again, it's that sort of show not tell, but at the same time they're telling us, but they're really showing us through the emotions and through the actions of these characters what this death meant to this community. And when you look at, again, I think that autopsy scene, his report of that, is one of the most poignant moments in that pilot. The stuff with the parents, obviously, that's big. But his reaction, like you said, just reading what happened to her and having to show them the photos and stuff like that. I mean, man, that's heartbreaking. And, it's one of those things, I'll get deep here for a second. As a parent, I lost my first child. So I can tell you that is something, it rewrites your DNA. It genuinely changes you as a human being. And going back and rewatching this now, it really does hit differently because I've been there. And I really appreciate that the reactions are genuine. They're not exploitative. I appreciate that the reactions are human. They're not schmaltzy. They're not someone trying to deliver something so that they can get an Emmy. It's real people reactions to real people, situations. And even in a show that's as stylized and quirky and unique as Twin Peaks, those scenes are what ground it. And those are the scenes that really help us still connect with it in a real sense, because these are real people. We can really appreciate that. And I'll be honest, that scene with Doc Hayward, really watching it again, it really hit me differently this time, more than it ever had. And I really just had mad respect, for the performance, the delivery, that scene, the way it's shot, the whole thing. It's so tastefully done. When you have to deliver horrible news, that scene is so tastefully done in a way to do that. And I really just appreciate those things, going back and watching it. You appreciate that so much more. As you get older, you can look back at things and see them differently. And Twin Peaks, I definitely look at differently. But again, it allows me to appreciate those characters and those moments so much more than I ever could have as a 15-year-old, at St. Albans High School. I could not have appreciated it as much then as I could now.
So we talk about like how they push the boundaries of like the nature of the crimes, and a lot of it being what the network would or wouldn't allow, but also just Lynch being a master of the camera. But do you think that also like our police dramas that would come later, like something like Homicide or NYPD Blue, do you think this also had an impact on like what was allowed to be shown and talked about on network television? Like, would those shows have been able to do that, and Twin Peaks not done it first?
I definitely would say NYPD Blue, because that was on ABC, and ABC was really riding the boundary train with Twin Peaks. They were really really testing the waters. So I think that probably gave them a little more confidence in taking things to the next level with NYPD Blue. And I remember like the hype behind that, like, oh my God, they're going to show a guy's ass on network television, and someone's going to say shit. And it's like, oh, wow, we can't fathom that this would be happening on network television. Now it's like, that's so tame. An episode of South Park has more, edginess to it than an episode of NYPD Blue. So it's crazy, to have been there when all that was going on. But I think you could say that at least with NYPD Blue, because ABC, I think they felt, again, that confidence that we probably can, crank it up a little closer to 11, because we've seen that people can kind of roll with it. And I think really more than anything, where Twin Peaks gets away with it so much, though, is just the fact that it is such a well-structured, well-written, well-shot, well-performed series. If it were like some sort of cheesy, like Fox, sitcom or Fox drama type thing from like the late 80s, early 90s, it doesn't pass muster. It doesn't get that clearance. But because of what it is, and because of who was behind the camera, ABC allowed them to try to do some new things. It was the 1990s. We're not in the 80s anymore. We can try to push it. And then of course NYPD Blue took that to the next level. But I don't know if I could say as much as like shows like Homicide and stuff, because again, that's a different network, and networks were just in a really weird space. I think Law and Order had more impact on things like Homicide than I would say Twin Peaks. But I think Twin Peaks and NYPD Blue, being on the same network and probably some of the same people behind the scenes at ABC, I think you could make that argument. And I think even if you didn't want to look at it from the standpoint of violence and things like that, could you say that the direction of Twin Peaks, the cinematic look of Twin Peaks had an impact? Oh, yes. Yes, it did. You look at the NYPD Blue and things like that, from that point on, those shows were being shot on real film cameras. They were given, to directors who were really shooting it like a film. Everything really changed after 1990 with Twin Peaks. Suddenly things just didn't look flat anymore. They didn't look like they were in a studio. They looked like something you were going to the cinema to see. So I think, it definitely had that impact. I wholeheartedly would agree with that statement. Yes.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, the film or the pilot, it feels more like a film than the
it does. No, it really does.
Than a lot of pilots do. Yeah, and
it's 90 something minutes, so it is like a theatrical length.
It was a 2-hour premiere. Yeah, it was a 2-hour premiere. And the great thing is the first episode right after that still carries that feel, and every episode since really does too. So the great thing was, it wasn't one of those things where the pilot was really special because it was a pilot, and then the regular show kind of looks lackluster. Like as a kid growing up, I loved Battlestar Galactica. Well, all the money was put into that pilot, which was released into theaters, right? So then every episode for the rest of that first season, they were just reusing the same footage because they didn't have the budget. And so it kind of cheapened some of that as you go on. I still love Battlestar Galactica, but I can freely admit that. But with Twin Peaks, it didn't have to rely on that. It got to have that cinematic feel every single episode, and that
which is remarkable because they Lynch went up to Spokane or to Washington in that area to fill the pilot, but then for the rest of the series they shot it on a back lot in LA, and so they had to there's some scenes where you see palm trees in the background. They're very you could blink and miss them, but there's it's interesting that and it's a testament to all the people working on the show sort of afterward, that they were able to hold on to that despite the fact that they were now restrained to more of a set. But the pilot still holds that special place where they shot it like a movie, and they shot it in almost a year earlier, I think, than the rest of the series, the rest of the first series. And
it was shot in 89. Yeah,
and they had this they shot it on location. In the Great Northern was, they used interiors from a real hotel. They used that they had to recreate for the show. A lot of those locations, they used real locations, the house, the sheriff's station. So it's interesting that that first one the pilot just really has this amazing set, and watching it again just really felt like that. It was Isabella Rossellini, by the way, who was originally cast.
That's what I was going to say. I thought it was Isabella.
Oh, wow. That makes total sense, because her and Lynch still a item at that point.
Yeah. But she couldn't, so they backed out, and so they still wanted to get a name. And Joan Chen was other than a few of the, like most of the they wanted to get somebody that was still big, and Joan Chen still had, like, Piper Laurie was, there was a number of, they got a few bigger names, but Joan Chen was one of them. But yeah, no, it would have been a very different character. I forgot that it was Isabella Rossellini, but yes, that's who they were.
Yeah, it's crazy what kind of talent he got for this show, not just counting the regular people he had worked with numerous times, like McLaughlin and Jack Nance, and some others, but getting, even in 1990, someone of Piper Laurie's stature to come in and do a TV show. Because, I mean, wasn't she not only is she Carrie's mom, wasn't she like just a powerhouse actor of her time?
I mean,
and
she was in film. She was in a lot of films for sure, and I think
she was Academy Award winner, if I remember correctly.
So he was able to, and they balanced that with some of the newer names and faces, especially for the younger characters, and some of the more character actor, like whether it's Grace Zabriskie or Jack Nance, like somebody's character, Russ Tamblyn. Really great. It's like
Griff from West Side, or Riff from West Side Story in here.
Amazing.
Dr. Jacoby is one of my faves, man.
Yeah, exactly. Really amazing ensemble that they Peggy Lipton. It's just it's great, right?
Watching this, because this came out, the premieres in 90, right?
Yep.
Were they already filming people under the stairs, or did Wes Craven watch this and it was like, those two are good together, I should put them in a movie?
I don't know the timing on that one, but
it's probably could have had some impact.
Because I mean, I think that's like 91, so like either that's just wonderful coincidence that happened, or Craven saw something and was like,
Well, I watched, speaking of cinematic aspects, so I rewatched the European pilot because it was released as a movie, and I wanted to remind myself of that sort of extra. So the story, for those who, I'm sure you guys know it, but for people watching that maybe don't, is that one of the ways they secured some of the funding for this show was to to film an extra 20 minutes that they could tack on to the end, so that the film could be released in Europe as a film, or potentially in North America if ABC decided not to pick up the pilot and run with the series. So they gave they were contractually obliged to finish the story. So Lynch, in his very Lynchian way, filmed a bizarre ending that includes a lot of the footage that we'll see in a couple of episodes from the dream sequence, and all of that was not in the original plan, but again, happy accidents, right? Happy accident that he and it came from that shot of basically a boom operator. I think, wasn't Frank Silva a boom operator on the pilot? And he gets accidentally caught in the reflection behind Grace Zabriskie in the mirror, his face, and it's terrifying.
You look for it, it's there.
Exactly, it's terrifying.
So that's how he becomes Bob.
And so he films this ending. So instead of at the very end, when she has a vision of someone picking up the rock and taking the necklace, instead of that, that's the first place that changed. Everything up to that point is exactly the same. Instead, she sees a reflection of Bob at the end of the bed, somebody in the room. So now she's actually remembers seeing someone in Laura's room. That leads them to the character that Hawk briefly saw wandering, the one-armed man briefly wandering to the hospital. They bring those two characters together as if they're basically a wandering killer and somebody who is his former partner chasing him down. I'm spoiling the ending if you don't want to know what happens in the European pilot. They track him down, they kill him, and then Cooper, 25 years later, has this encounter in the Red Room with someone who looks like Laura Palmer and who whispers in his ear. It's a bizarre ending that I think is fascinating as a Lynch fan to watch, but I think would have been, I think, for mainstream audiences, especially after all of the world building that they did up to that point, I think would have been amazing. But what I love is how they incorporate that stuff into, because in the next episode, so now in episode, I think they call it episode 1, the episode after the pilot, we now see that footage of Bob at the end of the bed, and it wouldn't have been there if he hadn't have filmed this. So I don't know, and we're probably not ready to jump into episode 1 yet, but just as a reference to jump ahead is that, you know, her vision of seeing Bob at the end of the bed was part of that, again, happy accident of Lynch needing to come up with some way to wrap up the story in 15, 20 minutes.
Well, we can go ahead, because what highlights of episode 1 traces to nowhere did you guys want to hit on?
Well, I mean, again, like, I think, you know, Kevin said this excellently, like that every episode is no filler. We start with panning across Cooper's room to seeing him, you know, hanging there. Like, it's just so good at building his character, his interaction with Audrey. I know that they were going to originally
the wonderful moment. You get the excuse me, but this is, pardon me, a damn fine cup of coffee. That is just one of those iconic moments of the show, and it's right there in that first episode. You know, it's just it's so perfect. Like that little moment is probably it's the thing I remember the most when I first think of episode 1. That is the first thing I think of, is this is, excuse me, a damn fine cup of coffee. It's just that you come right out the gates, you know, with that quirkiness, that offbeatness, and yet it still bridges nicely into the terror and the suspicion and the mystery. But I love that the beginning of the episode just kind of sets you up in this nice kind of happy vibe before it takes you into the really dark places.
Yeah, with the hanging upside down, with the coffee reference. And again, like, there's a lot of things that aren't in the pilot that we now associate really closely with Twin Peaks, and some of that is built over the next few episodes, and that's one of them. The coffee for sure is one of them. Like I said, I love that opening scene with Audrey and him interacting, and I like to, because I know they were going to build to a romance between him and Audrey. I'm so glad they did not. Like, it's so much better for his character that he ends up turning her down. But that opening scene with her is great because it really does build her sort of crush on him, which I actually think does make a lot of sense. I think that part is actually quite nice. Having it be a one-way sort of feeling makes a lot of sense and feels quite normal, and really builds her character. And I love her arc over the course of the series that goes in a very different direction than what they were going to do with her.
Audrey is one of my favorite characters on the show. Honestly,
and again, she's an accident.
She's a fantastic character.
Yeah, if Sherilyn Fenn hadn't auditioned and they liked her so much, they wouldn't have built out that character in the way that they did. And it turns out to be one of the highlights of the series.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Yeah, so it's great.
I love when Cooper gets. I just love when Cooper gets to the sheriff's department and everybody is eating a donut.
Yes.
3 for 3.
Well, and in the pilot, when they go and break up all the stuff at the roadhouse and track James down and all that, and they're like just the smorgasbord of all those donuts. I'm like, my God.
Policeman's dream. It's a policeman's dream. And that Lucy does that every night. Like,
who eats all those? They can't possibly eat all those donuts. It's not
it's not that large of a police force, right?
No, they're all diabetic if they're eating that every night. Jesus.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. But it's the first episode really does starts building out that world even more, right? Like, from what we saw in the pilot.
This is where you get, if I remember correctly, I'm looking at some highlights. This is where we get the autopsy scene with Doc Hayward, and that you go right from the kind of fun, silly, quirky stuff right into that. That really starts setting the tone for how this show is going to really ride that fine line of, you know, it can go either way at any given point. And I really love that, you know, in this first episode. And then you go from that, I think, right into the point of the Shelley Leo thing with the soap in the sun. You know, like, geez Louise, that's a lot coming at you in a 60-minute show, man. There's a lot coming at you in those first 20 minutes. It's all I'm saying.
Well, again, I think there's another happy accident there. Is it in this episode that we get the the elk head or the deer head on the table. Is that in this one?
Yes, that's in this episode.
And that was they were ready to shoot. They hadn't mounted the deer head on the wall like they were going to yet. So Lynch, or not Lynch, because this was now a different director at this point, but just said, let's just leave it there. And then they just make a comment to explain why it's there. And they move on to little things like that. Speaking of, that ties into, again, with more happy accents. I know it's not the autopsy, but it reminded me of that. But the scene where Cooper pulls the letter jumping back to the pilot, where he pulls the letter, again, the blinking light was not planned. Yep. It was a technical gaffe that they did. Lynch just said, I like it. Let's use it. We'll just film with the light blinking. And
it adds to the freakiness of the scene. Yes, like it adds a level of tension without doing anything, without any heavy lifting at all, man. Just a faulty 100%. Wire in this bulb or whatever makes this scene suddenly really sinister. And then, of course, getting the letter out from underneath the fingernail. To go back to the pilot, that very important how they're kind of world building that this is not the first time something like this has happened, at least not that Cooper's seen. And I really appreciate that. It's kind of like one of those, like, you're just kind of like, wait a minute, this has happened before. Like, what's with the letter under the nail? Like, what is going on here? And you don't really find out more about that until way later. But I love the fact that they're already planning the fact that this is not Cooper's first rodeo with something like this.
Right.
That's
which is...
Now, we know, of course, later on, we're going to see Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. We know the reference to Teresa Banks there. We don't know it at this point. And so, like, that's really creepy when you're just like, wait a minute, this is not the first time he's seen this? Like, that's unsettling because now we must have, like, some sort of serial killer at this point. Like, we don't even think about supernatural. We're just thinking there is like a Hannibal Lecter type guy running around this area. Like, what the hell? You know, that's creepy.
Which he references that in the town hall meeting, right? This is a similar case a few towns over. This is why the FBI has been called in, because normally, just a murder, you don't call the FBI in unless there's a pattern.
It's the fact that they crossed a state line. That's why they call in.
Yeah.
Because Ronette came across the state line, so they had to bring in the FBI at that point. That's the excuse for bringing in the FBI. But you're right, though. Now it's also connected to an investigation that the FBI has already been involved in, which, again, we don't have all those details yet. That all sort of plays out later. More happy accidents. This ended up being, creating a really fascinating movie plot later too. So, I mean, it's a lot of stuff that just came out of the organic, sort of writing process. Just pretty amazing. So,
well, and we get more of these soap opera elements and relationships going on because isn't this where we find out Benjamin Horne and Catherine Martell are in cahoots, for him to
the hotel, the motel.
Ben Horne likes feet. He likes spicy feet pics. That's what we find out real
quick. I guess him and Tarantino could hang out.
Yeah, dude, I guarantee he's a big fan of Tarantino's work, that Ben Horne.
Yeah.
He's a big fan. No, but I love that scene because, like, we've heard, we've seen Catherine talking to someone on the phone. We don't know yet exactly who that is.
Right.
And then, of course, you find out, like, it's Ben Horne, and it's like, oh, that's sleazy. And it's like, yeah, it's supposed to be. They're in a sleazy motel doing sleazy things because they're sleazy people.
And Josie's outside taking photos. Like, the soap opera bits really start to get really interesting as we build this out, for sure. Yeah. And
because then you've got, like, everything with the sawmill. This is also where we get the episode with the fish and the percolator. That's that's in this. So, like,
that's right.
You get all these little things happening. But yeah, it's like you're learning more and more about the importance of the Packard sawmill and the history of the Packard sawmill. Like, there's more going on there than what you think. The whole relationship with the Martells and Josie and everything there, that stuff starts bubbling up. The fact that Sheriff Truman has been seeing Josie, romantically. You know that Josie learned English from Laura. Like, there's all of these little things happening left and right that continues to make all these characters interesting. And again, that's the thing I love about the show. It's the murder is there, yes, but we're learning so much more about the relationships of these characters. Like, the Packard sawmill stuff has nothing to do with Laura Palmer. Like, it doesn't. It really doesn't.
No.
But it's fascinating to know where the hell that's going. They're really talking about trying to blow this thing up and insurance and like, holy shit, man, this is crazy stuff. So this episode really starts fleshing things out from just beyond the murder to the relationships and the other stuff going on in the town, because there were other things going on before this murder threw a wrench into the works. So again, we start learning about Bobby and Mike and their money situation, and we learn about Laura Palmer's safe deposit box and the connection with that. All of these things now that are starting to come to light.
Well, and if we jump back to Audrey,
relationship.
I love that there's this count, and again, because she wasn't originally planned to be such a part of this series, but there's this counterbalance between Laura, so Leland losing his daughter to a murder, and the part with Ben and Audrey, and how I lost you years ago, right? Like, it's so powerful. Like, I just find that relationship between Ben and Audrey so fascinating.
I love that Audrey is she's such a troll to her father. Like the whole thing with the Norwegians, where she just walks in the room and it's just like, I'm sad because my friend was murdered. It's just like, and then the glee that she has watching all of it, just like she's ruining her father. Like, it's hilarious. She's ruining her father, and she takes such joy in it, such glee in it.
But the counter between that. And the way we're presented with Leland and I mean, because, how much does Audrey know about what's like, I think we find out some sort of as it goes along, but about who her father is and what kind of stuff he's been up to. And, she does, and I think that, I think she knows some. I'm not sure she knows the extent of all that was
She doesn't quite know how deep that rabbit hole goes, but she knows there's a rabbit hole. I mean, she absolutely knows.
Yeah, and there's all the stuff with her brother. There's the stuff
we learn about
with her brother,
and him learning from how upset he is that Laura's not there.
There's a lot going on. The Horn family stuff is really interesting too. Getting back into soap opera.
Yes, it is.
So much of again.
And we haven't even got Jerry in it yet. We haven't even got to Jerry.
Yeah, we have not. He hasn't showed up yet.
Not yet. So and then we haven't talked about. We haven't talked about James and Donna yet either.
James and Donna. I really like.
Speaking of soap opera,
that's the very soap opera heavy component of this first season in particular. Boy, this is the heavy schmaltzy, romance stuff, but it's not schmaltzy. It's really well done. But yeah, I love the fact that you've got Donna in this relationship with Mike, and again, talking about the abusive relationships. Here is Donna, this sweet, pure, wonderful, wholesome, all-American girl who's being terrorized by her football player, boyfriend. Like, we don't see him physically do anything, but his directions towards her, his actions towards her, when he pulls up to Big Ed's gas farm and it's just like telling her that she needs to be with him and telling her what she needs to do. Like, that shit's intense, man. It's wrong. And I love that Ed's like, you shouldn't be putting up with this. Like,
that's a great
thing. Like,
it gives us so much. And again, here's another father-daughter combo, and they're all so different. Like, we've got this is the idealized father-daughter,
right? Because she gets found out that she snuck out, right? Her sister immediately rats her out, and
that's a great thing.
And he goes to pick her up, and even though he's like, "Yeah, we better," like, it's very 1950s sitcom, like, yeah, what you did was wrong, but I'm so proud of you that you're my daughter. We better go back and get your sister's bike.
And you got to fill it up with air.
It shows that they have a relationship where he knows that she wouldn't have done this if it wasn't important.
Wasn't that what he says, or something like that?
Yeah. And so,
and I love that. Yeah, he doesn't question it. I just love that he doesn't question it. Like, he like you said, he believes in her. He trusts her. And so I love the fact that he doesn't even have to be, well, what were you doing? What's this all about? He just knows. Yeah, you're safe right now. Let's just get you home. And again, those little moments, they're so genuinely heartfelt. Like,
and some of it is informed by the fact that his daughter, her best friend was just murdered, and he just wants to she's not going to get murdered. So the fact that he's relieved that she's safe plays into it. But at the same time, that relationship,
those could be very one-note scenes, and they're not. They're played so sincerely that yes, they are the soap opera trope, but they're not performed like a soap opera. They're performed like a legitimate scene between real people, and I really appreciate that. I don't think, because everybody, I'm in several Twin Peaks fan pages, and a lot of people don't like Donna and James.
I know,
I'm like, but I like Donna and James because they are so wholesome. They're like the few pure people in this town, because everybody's basically tainted
in episode 1,
and even they're tainted in their own ways. Don't get me wrong. but they're so sweet compared to most of the people in that town.
But we do get that scene where he comes over for dinner in episode 1, right? So
it's such a sweet scene. Yeah.
It's a sweet scene, but you also builds the characters. It again shows us the way that the show is giving us different families, because we've also got Bobby and his father, which we could talk a little bit about as well.
I love Briggs. Major Briggs is a wonderful character, man.
Yeah, and he's so interesting, because with him and with Bobby and Mike and James, Lynch is playing with those stereotypes and reversing them. Like, Major Briggs should be like, typically when you portray a military dad, they're overbearing and kind of a dick, but Major Briggs is like, look, you don't need to be rebellious. I understand. I respect it, but I am your father. He's like, if you need me to talk, you need a sympathy ear, I'm here for you. Like, and then the football players who are supposed to be the all-American people, there's more the dark side. And James is a biker, which normally that's the rebel, right? But he's the sensitive guy who's caring and sympathetic. So, yeah,
very much so. You're right.
It really is. It's a wonderful misdirection.
Yeah. And I agree with you. I think that James and Donna are more interesting characters than a lot of fans give them credit for. I think that maybe in season 2 they don't get handled as well, but I do think there's
in season 1 though they're very well handled.
Yes. But again, Maddie plays in, and we're not there yet, but Maddie plays in a lot of their story.
No, but you're right. They get really interesting in this first season. But even in this episode, I just like when Donna is dealing with the guilt of her feelings for James. Like, that's such a sweet moment between her and her mom. And again, it's a genuine, heartfelt moment, and it's played so sincerely. But the whole thing of like, I'm so sad about losing my friend, but I'm so happy about the fact that I've discovered this love. And you know what? That's a legitimate thing, man. Like, love hits you in weird times and weird ways, man. It's not an exact science. And something like this would bring people closer together, because you're looking for something that makes you feel safe and feel normal again when your whole world's been ripped out from underneath you. And I really love the fact that they give time.
Yeah, and they have that shared relationship with her. Like, they were close to her. So that's another reason why they would be bonded together.
They're the only ones that know certain things. So there's shared secrets, which brings people together. But I also think there's maybe a part of Laura that was maybe, again, having seen later stuff, maybe there was a part of Laura that was bringing the two of them together to a certain degree. I mean,
absolutely.
You can absolutely say that. When you look at the grand scheme of things, I can completely agree with that statement. And especially once you finish the return. I could genuinely see that. And I just really love the fact that, that the two of them, again, they do have secrets. And some of these secrets may actually pertain to what happened to her. So they are very interesting and very critical to the structure of the first season in particular. I like I said, I like James and I like Donna. And I like that, James already makes a reference to the Bookhouse Boys. We don't quite know what that is yet.
Right.
But we know this is going on between, Hawk and Big Ed. So something's up with these guys. Like, all right, who are the Bookhouse? Is this some sort of vigilante shit? Like, what are we getting into? So I love that name gets dropped. So we're starting to build that part of the Twin Peaks universe. The force for good that is the Bookhouse Boys, there's just this episode, again, you get a little more, you get that whole mystery. You find out now who took the locket.
Yeah.
Because we know at the very end, we see Dr. Jacoby. And again, that's suspicious because he was her therapist. Why is he what's with this?
He was high on my suspects list in the original watch for sure.
And you know what? He should have been. Like, when you look back at it now, he should have been.
Oh, he's especially as an adult.
Well, he's acting very strangely when
creepy. He should
when lose his Truman license. And Cooper come to the and he is sharing way too much information with the police. It's like, and even Cooper's like, that guy's a psychiatrist. He's like,
again, that's one of the major differences, like watching it as an adult compared to watching it as a teenager. When I first watched it, is seeing just how unprofessional he is, just how creepy he is. Like there's a lot of boundaries being crossed, and I think the diary actually implies there's even more. Not implies. I think it might even say.
Oh,
It's been a
yeah.
long time since I've read it.
Says,
Yeah.
It
Okay.
basically says,
So he's not a good man either. But yeah, he was high on the suspect list.
So
and again, I think he's there filling one of those very possibly the murderer roles. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But it's funny because I remember back in the day that you can find the footage on YouTube. There was an episode where Phil Donahue had several of the cast members on the Donahue Show, which was a big deal back in the 90s. And they had a poll that showed who people thought were the top suspect. And like Dr. Jacoby wasn't even anywhere near the top. Like he was barely even on it. Oh no, we lost. There he is. But it's so funny because Dr. Jacoby is like nowhere near the top of that list. And it's like, if you go back and look at it now, he should absolutely be at the top of that list.
Yeah.
I mean, dude is like a groomer. He really is. It's like, it's
totally. Well, and I'd like to do a little bit of spoiler talk here, because one of the things that I find interesting is to go back and sort of watch now, even though in the pilot, especially by the first episode writing, but they had not picked who the killer was going to be. But I think there are moments in the pilot and in this episode where you could make a case that there are clues being made that Leland is the killer. Like there are moments. I mean, some people have said, I don't buy that. I think you can interpret that initial Leland scene where he says, before he's told that Laura's dead, he says, my daughter is dead. Some people have read that as, well, that's a clue right there, because Truman doesn't tell him. But I think in the context of the scene, it makes sense that he has just
right. That was what he would. Yeah. The sheriff has come to my place of work in the middle of the day.
And he says it's about Laura. He says,
my wife has just called me looking for Laura in a panic. You can put the two things together very easily.
But a better moment for me is when there's the moment where she's about to have her vision, and she hears a noise. Who's upstairs? And there is, it's one of my officers and your husband. And there's a look on her face, right? And that, I think it's very subtle. And again, it's probably a happy accident, because it's probably wasn't necessarily planned to be. But that's, I think, actually a moment where now, going back and knowing everything, you see it and you go, she knows, right? There's a part of her that knows. She might be suppressing it, but there's a part of her that knows.
Yeah. And I think when you look at Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, you know she knows. She knows. But what was really interesting watching the pilot in the first episode, knowing what we're going to know in the future, especially from Twin Peaks Fire Walk, it's amazing how the shots of that ceiling fan play now. Because they're there. They're very prominent. They're very prominent. Like the camera holds static while Sarah goes from room to room, and that ceiling fan is center in the shot. And when you know what that represents, like it's genuinely unsettling. Like I literally was sitting there, like I could kind of feel myself tensing up. I'm like, oh God, they knew something, because Lynch is very like transcendental, like, he's really into like spirituality and like meditation and all of that. He's very dreams have meaning or connections, and very beyond just the surface in his thinking, not just in just his films, but as a human being, he is very into transcendental meditation. So like he very much believes that there really are no happy accidents, that things are happening for a reason. Even if I don't understand it right now, it means something in the long run. And so going back and watching the pilot in that first episode and seeing the emphasis on that ceiling fan, it's like he knew. He may not have known who the killer was going to be, but he knew that was going to be connected, man. Because it is
and I think that it was Mark Frost and I hope I don't have this wrong, but he might have said that the killer, like they didn't know who it was going to be when they were writing that pilot, but that over writing the first season, the killer revealed themselves to them. So it could be looking back at some of those scripts or looking back at some of those episodes, they started to see these things emerge, that it was in her house, right? Like, so there's lyrics in Rocking Back Inside My Heart, which is a song that appears in season 2, that it says, shadow in my house, the man, he has brown eyes, she'll never go to Hollywood. There's this idea of it being that the home not being a safe place, right? That is just so unsettling. So it's the ceiling fan, It's all of those things. But and now when you're listening to Doc Hayward, or you're seeing the train car and all of that stuff, now knowing everything, it hits even harder because it's even so much more disturbing and so much more upsetting.
Oh, it
that
is.
She had no refuge. Like, we think of our homes as our safe zone.
It's your safe place.
Exactly. For abuse, domestic violence sufferers. That's
hell, school wasn't safe for her because of Bobby and James. School wasn't safe.
Right.
Her work wasn't safe because Meals on Wheels, she's going to different houses. That wasn't safe.
Yeah.
Her home wasn't safe. Like, nowhere was safe for this girl.
Yeah.
That's right.
You can't.
Everything was a nightmare for her.
Everything was. Yeah. And the fact that this is happening to a high school aged girl, Jesus H.
Well, it was happening to her from,
if
we read the diary, it was happening to her from before she was in high school.
God.
It goes way back. We there's a whole passage about her first period and stuff like it had been going on for a long
Jennifer Lynch was one of the few people that they shared the killer's identity with when she went to write that book, and again, writing it from a young woman's point of view. Like, I was so glad they got her to do it, because I think that having that diary written, and maybe we'll all talk about the diary one day on this, but just having it actually written from a young woman's perspective, I think, instead of from these men's perspective, I think was just a really smart move on their part. Yeah.
No, it was. And the fact that she was able to, bring her own personal experiences into writing this from the right mind space,
Right.
If I were to sit down and write this, what do I know about my first period? I've never had one.
Right.
That's absolutely stupid for me to be the one to do that, or for a guy to be the one to do that. I love the fact that it was Jennifer Lynch. And it's really, when you read the diary is scary. Like, it's a hard read.
Everybody had to put it down a few times. I also listened to the audiobook.
It is like,
my God.
Jesus H, man.
So they had Cheryl Lee read the audiobook like many years later, around the time The Return was coming out. And she did an amazing job. And she does Bob's voice. Like, it is incredible, but very difficult. Very difficult.
Oh God, no! It is a very hard read, and I think when that came out, people were so excited to get Twin Peaks merch, right?
Yeah,
they just bought it thinking, "Oh, this is going to be fun and cool." And whatever. No, God damn, it's awful. It's horrific.
No, Cooper tapes are more of that, even though
the Cooper tapes are more of what you're wanting. Yeah, they're fun.
They're a little lighter, a little more fun. But let's talk a little bit about Diane here, because because it's like, it's interesting. Now we know she's a real person. I know there was a lot of speculation, and I was on board with the whole theory that Diane's not real. She's just a device he uses to collect his thoughts. But there was, but I mean, now we know Diane was real.
Yes, Diane was real.
Yeah,
but it's just so fascinating that we've got this great sort of like device that they probably again created for a narrative purpose. Like, this is a great way we can get some information out, that turned into, like, again, it's the brilliance of the piece that turned into this signature thing, right? That just was such an amazing creative piece.
Well, and it's funny because there were many people who thought Diane was the tape recorder, that he named the tape recorder Diane. So he was just like Diane, and he's like talking to the tape recorder. There were people who thought that. I was always just on the team that, she's a real person. I would have never suspected she would be who she was in The Return.
No.
Right.
I suspected little old lady listening to the things, like typing up the report. Like, I didn't suspect her to be, Laura Dern, basically. But yeah, I always thought she was real. But I'm with you. I loved the device of it alone. Diane, whatever Diane or whoever Diane is, she's a very important part of Cooper's life. And because of that, we care about Diane because we care about Cooper. And it just, again, it's a fascinating way to do like almost an exposition dump.
Yes.
Without being an exposition dump. That's the
100%. That's what I think is so brilliant about it. And there's so many examples of that, but Diane is one of the best examples of that. It's just a way to get a ton of information out, a ton of exposition, like you said, but in a way that is fascinating, is entertaining, is unique and quirky and clever, and just few examples of just that level of.
I was very excited when I got the copy of the Cooper audio tapes. That was fun. That was really fun. But reading the diary was a very different animal.
Yes.
Holy shit, man! It made me cringe. I mean, it's intense. It's scary. Like, it really is. And if you read that while you're watching the original series and stuff, like, man, it's just a beautiful companion piece to the terror of this season. Like, it really does help just expand upon how horrific this girl's life was, man. Like, her life was just basically like she was just doomed from birth, basically.
Well, what I love about that is that so many women die in media for the purpose of creating an interesting story, right? The whole fridging concept, right?
Yes.
And what Twin Peaks and Twin Peaks almost started, well, it kind of starts like that, but they so quickly to make Laura such a full human being, and they do justice to her story and to her suffering in a way that, and Fire Walk with Me makes it, and it's now about her. She's now the main character. She's no longer Fred. She is, and there is the salvation, like the ending of Fire Walk with Me. And again, we'll save this when we talk about it, but like there's such a beauty to it because in some ways it's about her liberating herself from all of the horrors of the men in her life.
Yes, and it's funny, when Fire Walk with Me was first announced, everybody was so excited because they thought it was going to be a sequel to the series, which had been canceled, and of course it's not. Now, I will say for those listening, if you're going to go down the path of Twin Peaks, watch the first 2 seasons, then you absolutely have to watch Fire Walk with Me before you watch The Return, because luckily The Return made Fire Walk with Me one of the most important pieces of Twin Peaks ever. I loved the film when I saw it. But boy, it suddenly became like the most critical thing you had to have for you to really get stuff out of The Return. There is so much.
But even for the series, like I said, it takes a character who is just brutalized for the point of, entertainment value for getting us sucked into this story, and turns her experience into something like true. It makes it about her, makes her story and her life.
It puts the power into Laura Palmer instead of taking it from her. It basically energizes her. And that's so important for Twin Peaks: The Return. Jesus H, it's so important for that.
It is.
But
I've got my thoughts about the end of The Return about that.
Oh God, we will have a hell of a discussion on that. That final episode is going to be its own cast. It has to be. Like, there's way too much to talk about. But getting back to this first episode, again, I like that the murder is still definitely there. I mean, it's definitely the core A line. Yeah. But it's again, we talked about it earlier, and again, you kind of have to watch it to understand. But the soap operatic moments of it are what really start getting the viewers, I think, into the world of Twin Peaks. Like, if it was just about the murder, that's going to get boring pretty quick. I mean, I hate to say it, but it is, like, because there's only so much you can unveil in each episode to make you actually have a TV series. If it's a mini series, that's one thing, but it's a series. They were planning on it to be a full-blown series, so you can only drop so many breadcrumbs for your A-list story in each episode. You can't give away too much because you've got to hook them for the next one. But what was brilliant here was, again, the B, C, D, and E storylines also had their own breadcrumbs and also had their own like cliffhangers. So you were constantly wanting to come back to find out, oh man, now I want to know what's going on with Cooper, but now I got to get back and find out what's going on with Bobby and Mike. Like, why do they owe Leo $10,000? Like, what is going on here? Yeah. Who is this Jacques Renault guy that's name dropped?
Who is this husband of Peggy's that's in prison or is about to get paroled?
Hank,
Who's Hank Jennings? Yeah. So it's like, there's so many things now that you've got, that you are now invested in these characters. Will Donna and James stay together? Are they going to help solve the murder of Laura? Like, what else do they know? So there's so many things, what about Leo? What's going to happen to Shelley? Is he going to kill Shelley? Because Jesus H, he comes near to it in this episode. So,
well, and again, with the theme, like there's Shelley and Norma with their, in these relationships and with, the wrong men. And there's just this really interesting, again, the show's really getting into this whole theme about, abuse, like in Shelley's case, literally. But I mean, we find out from Norma's case, I mean, that relationship's not a healthy, positive relationship. Her relationship with Hank, her marriage wasn't
but isn't it interesting knowing what we know where the show is going?
Yes.
Isn't it interesting to go back now and see all the various doppelgangers?
Yes.
Look at Shelley and Norma.
Yeah.
They're basically twins, man. They're basically doppelgangers.
Yeah. Oh, and
Look
I
at
love
Bobby
their
and
relationship. I love their relationship as it goes over the course of the series,
right. But
into
it's
even the
interesting how they're
return.
both in the same. They're both like the
Yep.
same person. They're in a relationship with the wrong person and in love with someone else on the outside of that
That's
relationship who's better
That's
for
right.
them.
Yeah.
Like there are all those little things that happen now where we get these little things like that, and I think that's so interesting because doppelgangers and tulpas becomes like a big thing down the road. That it's kind of funny that we're subconsciously seeing it here already. Like it's just it's really, again, there's a richness to this going back and revisiting it. I'm so glad that this
and we
is
get
happening.
Just little hints of Nadine. Like we don't really know. But we get those little. So like you were saying about getting us hooked into like who is Ed's wife and what is going on with her, and like because at this point she just seems grumpy.
What is up with those drapes?
Right. Yeah, exactly. She just seems strange, but not like know.
I will say again, one of those favorite lines from episode 1. Cotton balls, and she's like, "By God, those drapes will be quiet now." Like, oh my God, dude! Every time, like, that is one of my favorite.
Oh, I know. And we get the log lady. Like,
so upset.
Yep, log lady.
In the first episode, we just see her flicking with the lights, but we don't really know much about who she is. She's holding a log. That's weird, but we don't really know. But here we meet her, and now we see, okay, she's full on weird. And where is this going, right?
And she's insulted when Cooper was like, "What did your log say?" Instead of because she's like, "Ask it."
Yeah, ask it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I love too. One of the great things about the Blu-ray set that I have is it has the Bravo TV show intros that David Lynch actually wrote and directed.
Yeah.
And so it's nice to go back and watch those going into each episode because, boy, Lynch really does some neat little Easter egg plants and stuff in that, which is really cool. And so it's really funny to me, like that was done specifically for Bravo. Like, again, how weird was this in the 90s that Bravo was like the channel that got to run it in syndication? And that not only did they get it in syndication, they got Lynch to do a special intro with the log lady for every single episode.
I know.
Every single one of the entire 2-season run. And they're so cool. Like, they're so great.
It's a miracle,
I love Margaret. I love her so much. And man, oh man, like it's so good to have extra stuff with the log lady. She's always a treat. And I love the fact that they really let her kind of set the tone for just how dark and mysterious the world really is. Like, she's really not crazy. That woman's in tune with shit that we can't fathom. Like,
this is one of the best parts of the return. Like, one of the most emotional parts of the return for sure. But yes, I agree with you 100%.
I was a wreck.
Yeah, I'm so glad they've incorporated the Bravo introductions because it really does, like, it just adds to the series in such an amazing way. And I know at that point Lynch really, was
again. No, he knew at that point where he was going with it, and he really lets her really set that sort of. She's kind of preparing you at the beginning of each episode that things are absolutely not what they seem, that there are forces in play that you aren't even aware of yet. You don't even know what's coming down the pipeline, but she's setting up these things. She's like dangling that carrot with these little intros. And I love that because, again, I was so excited when I finally got to see the Bravo intros because I didn't have Bravo when I was, in college. I couldn't get access to it. So anytime I came home, I was always looking for it on, like in the guide to see if it would pop up so I could catch those little previews because I was so excited that they existed. And it was like the newest thing we'd had in Twin Peaks since the series had been canceled and since the movie. So I was like, I got to see what this is. But I love the fact that they are a part of it now. And honestly, I'm so glad they're a part of that Blu-ray because I can't fathom watching the series now without those.
No,
because they really do set such a nice tone.
Yeah. There's a line in this one, in episode 1, where she says, "Do we have the time to learn the reasons behind human beings' varied behavior?" I think not. And I just think there's just so much in there that's great because it really is. And she starts up by saying, "I carry a log. Yes, is that funny to you?" Like she's challenging us to say, like, don't laugh. Like, if you're laughing at this, you're not really getting it, right? Like the quirkiness isn't about comic relief. I think I said that earlier, right? It's about creating this like human beings are essentially weird and we behave in irrational and random ways and that's part of the human experience. And I love that.
Yeah, it's definitely, again, the perspective of watching it now, rewatching it now at 47 versus being 15. when I was watching it all at first. Like, it really is amazing how much more. And again, just getting more into Lynch's filmography, and really when he sort of really getting his voice once he got out of the studio side of things with, like, again, my favorite is Lost Highway, but like Wild at Heart, Lost Highway, Mulholland Drive, you start getting that real David Lynch. Like, that's all what he always wanted to do. And you see pieces of it in Twin Peaks. You definitely do. And in Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, it's definitely there. Yeah. But it's when you've seen his other films and you kind of understand like the dream logic and dream structure that he likes to play around in, it really adds that. Going back and rewatching Twin Peaks, like you pick up on that more. It was more subtle because it was for broadcast network television, but it's there. And I like that each episode has that sense of mystery. And I like the fact that, like you talked about, is watching it, in high school, we were laughing at the log lady because it's so ridiculous and so crazy and so weird. Now I watch her with absolute awe and reverence because I know that this woman is such a major player in things that nobody else understands. And if you haven't read it, the 2 books that Mark Frost did for Twin Peaks before The Return came out, man, Margaret is a fantastic character. Like,
she really is.
Oh man, she is more than the log lady. I'll just say that.
And from what I will understand, the log lady was the very first aspect of Twin Peaks that was ever developed, because he was working with her. She used to be married to Jack Nance. And they he worked with her many years ago, and they talked about a character that she was in touch with. First of all, it was trees, but eventually it became a little log. And then when he developed Twin Peaks, he added her in because he had talked to her about this idea for this character many years before. And so she's actually this character that has kind of manifested itself into existence in a way that wasn't just created, we need this character to be this wise, or we need this character to be this, quirky thing. It was this character that he had already developed with her, and then they found a home for her within this world. And I think that's really fascinating.
That's so perfectly. Like,
wow.
It really is. It's
the nail on the head. Perfect to meld like something that you wouldn't think would be part of the show, but is like the groundwork of what the show becomes because of how in tune she is with like the other side.
Yeah.
I will say this, guys, we have ignored maybe the most important clue that gets dropped in this episode. And that is that Agent Cooper looks at a box of chocolate bunnies.
Right.
Is it about the bunnies? Is it really about the bunnies? And I love how that comes back in the return.
I love that they reference that in the return. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Bunnies. Yeah, it's all about the chocolate bunnies. It's got to have some meaning to it.
That's right.
Well, I think what I guess is, maybe since we're kind of at the end of this episode, and before we get into spoiler territories for other episodes, I think it'd be interesting to kind of talk about, like, are there particular things in media that have paid homage to Twin Peaks that you're a fan of? And I'll start with my favorite thing, perhaps, and that is I love the series Psych. If you've not seen the episode where they do a spoof called Dual Spires, I wholeheartedly recommend you check that out, because they got Julie Cruz to record the Psych theme song as a Julie Cruz song.
Wow.
It is get Lenny Von Dolan is in it. Bobby is in it. Dana Ashbrook, Robin Lively, several cast members. Even the log lady has an appearance, and it's a really cute setup how they work with her in it. But oh my God in heaven, if you've not seen it, it is in season 5, I believe, of Psych. The episode is called Dual Spires. Go watch it. It's phenomenal. It's like my favorite thing, because James Roday is apparently, he plays Sean Spencer on the show. He is apparently a huge Twin Peaks fan, and it shows. There are all even of course Sherilyn Fenn is also in this, as is Cheryl Lee, and Ray Wise was regularly on the show as a preacher, and they do have a little spoof about his white hair. It's great. It's such a good episode. I will not say more because I want you to discover it, but you can find it on Amazon. But yeah, season 5, Dual Spires. If you're a Twin Peaks fan and if you like Psych remotely, you must watch that episode. It's my favorite episode of Psych, and it's probably my favorite like Twin Peaks spoof, aside from Kyle MacLachlan's appearance on SNL. The Twin Peaks sketch
SNL
they did on that.
Yes, that's a great.
Chris Farley is Leo Johnson saying, well, I killed her. No, look, here's pictures of me. Here's me with her body. Here's me killing her. And Cooper's like, nope, it can't be him. I'm going to throw this rock, and if it breaks the window, he's innocent. It's like, like that is that's Simpsons, one of the single best episodes of SNL ever. But man, that sketch is fantastic.
The Simpsons did a pretty good spoof as well.
Yes.
And I have to say, I was really thrilled. There is a brief moment in Everything Everywhere All at Once when they're flipping through like versions of Michelle Yeoh where she's sitting in the red room. And I was like, with the Venus, I think, behind her. And it's just like, oh my God, I can't believe they did it.
Of course the Daniels would do that, because that seems very much they would be into Lynch. But not so much a reference or a spoof, but I remember there's an episode of Parks and Rec where Adam Scott's character is talking about like how obsessed he would be about the show and going on chat boards and listening to the commentaries and everything. I think he's talking to Rob Lowe like what they're doing in their motel rooms at night.
Yes, it's something like that. Yeah. I'll also say, if you've not seen Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated, they do a wonderful homage to Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated. It's really, really well done.
Interesting.
When you're watching it, you will know exactly what you're watching. When you see it, you're like, oh my God, they really went there, and it's fantastic. Could not believe that a Scooby-Doo cartoon from the 2000s would be a Twin Peaks reference, but it's there, and it's great. If you love Scooby-Doo, which I do, and you love Twin Peaks, find that episode. You can even just find the scene on YouTube. Just look up Scooby-Doo Twin Peaks. You'll find it. It's hilarious. It's so clever. So great. But yes, the Simpsons one is one of my favorites, with Homer watching the giant and the horse dancing underneath the streetlight. Fascinating. I have no idea what it means.
Yes.
And then in the homage to Who Shot Mr. Burns, the homage to Who Shot JR, there's the scene where Chief Wiggum sees Lisa talking to him in reverse and stuff. And it's just like Twin Peaks.
That's right. Yeah.
That's fantastic, because you get Who Shot JR and Twin Peaks with Who Killed Laura Palmer. It's like, it's such a beautiful hit. It's great.
Yeah. I do think that the pilot, like, there's a lot about the series that I love, but I do think that the pilot is probably, like, arguably one of the best 90 minutes of TV that there ever was. Like, it's up there in terms of just what an achievement it is in so many ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean,
it's hard to put anything above it.
Yeah, how many pilots are shot like that? You know, even though a lot of times they get the bigger budget. I mean, you know, we were talking about this brought on, you know, more, because more television is more the writer's showcase than a director. But there have been shows like Mindhunter with David Fincher, and a little bit even with Poker Face with Ryan Johnson and a couple of other directors. But I think prior to Twin Peaks, the closest thing you could say is maybe Michael Mann's Crime Story, because Miami Vice wasn't even that artouristic, because Michael Mann wasn't as heavily involved as he was with Crime Story. But I think this took it.
I'll say this. There's one TV show that definitely was an inspiration for it. And if you watch it, again, very cinematic for a 60s television series, and that's The Prisoner.
Yeah, The Prisoner.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
That is absolutely a precursor, and it's very much an influence on Twin Peaks, especially the structure of the story, finding out where he's at, finding out who he is. That's all there, and that's where Twin Peaks definitely wears a lot of on its sleeve. Its inspiration comes from The Prisoner. But yeah, I think before Twin Peaks, probably The Prisoner, and again, another inspiration for Twin Peaks, The Fugitive.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
So
especially with the mystery too, right?
Yes. Those two shows were highly influential to Twin Peaks. And if you look at them in the time that they were made, they were way more cinematic than most dramas on television. They did not look like they were just being shot in a studio, even though they were on a lot. They didn't have that look. They really went above and beyond from what you would normally think of for regular television dramas at that time. And I think, to me, those shows definitely, you don't have a Twin Peaks without those. But then really, honestly, almost every drama with any kind of mystery, like since Twin Peaks, they don't exist without Twin Peaks. Like it's really like, to me, it's that simple. If Twin Peaks doesn't get made, there are so many shows in the 90s and the 2000s and on that either don't happen or don't happen until way later because they didn't have that spark of inspiration to make them happen. Twin Peaks is one of those shows that if you were alive when it was on, you remember where you were. Like, you remember how big it was. You understand just how influential that it was, man. It was ever the cover of Rolling Stone, the cover of Premiere Magazine, like TV Guide, like it was everywhere. You go to the bookstore and you got the Laura Palmer Diary, the Agent Cooper book, like the audiobooks, like it was absolutely everywhere. I mean, again, we were talking about it earlier, man. I mean, trading cards. Yeah, I mean, it was ridiculous. You couldn't go anywhere without seeing Twin Peaks. I mean, I owned the soundtrack. You know, I had it on cassette, and then I got it on CD later. But yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things where you really don't understand how big it was and how influential it was if you weren't around at that time. And you can go back and look at it now, and you can definitely appreciate it. But man, it's one of those, like, if you weren't there when it was really, you know, when it was first appearing, like, you just can't understand what a heavy lift it did to the world of television, and more importantly to the world of television, like writing and storytelling and world building. Like, just don't really understand what TV was like before it. You only have what you have now is you have the benefit of TV after it.
Right. Yeah, I think that's well said. That's a good way to wrap it up. I think that's. Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say pretty much the same sentiment as you. So finish your thought, Colin. And
I was just gonna say. I mean, I think you also it introduced a whole generation to a kind of narrative storytelling that wasn't as linear, wasn't as concrete. And I think it actually influenced a lot of cinema. And there's a lot of directors that are working today who point to Twin Peaks as being an influence for them. But I think it opened up audiences. Like, I know that it was a jumping off point for me to go see a lot of cinema that I wouldn't have seen before, partially because of Lynch, but also just because of the way that it opened up my mind to different ways of telling stories that maybe I wasn't sort of experiencing before.
That's fair. That's very fair. I mean, for me, it just made me a lifelong David Lynch fan, and it made. It's funny because I look back, you know, at that time of my life, and I was just as pumped about the new David Lynch film as I was like the new Spielberg film or the new James Cameron film. Like, Lynch became immediately like a big part of my film lexicon, and it was just like I would talk about David Lynch films to anybody who would listen. And my best friend in high school, Joel, luckily he was also into it like me. We went to see Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me 3 times in 1 week because we knew it was going to be gone the week after. Right. So we went together, and then we went and got our girlfriends and took them to see it. And then we went and took some other friends to go see it because we were like, this is the most awesome movie. And then the problem was most of our friends had not watched the series. So they're all just like, what the hell have you taken me to?
Right.
Everybody who saw it with us, they would at least say this: it was unlike anything they'd ever seen before. They would at least find something that they would find enjoyable about it, whether it's a performance, whether it was just the way a shot was done, a sequence, whatever. They could at least walk away saying that there was some positive about it, even if they didn't have clue one as to what they were going into. So, you know, it definitely made me excited about Lynch. It made me want to go back and revisit his filmography. We were in a mad dash to find a copy of Eraserhead because no video rental store in my area had it. Like, it was so hard to finally find a copy. I didn't see Eraserhead until I was in college. I didn't see it until a good 6 or 7 years after Twin Peaks. But I finally saw it.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for embarking on this journey with me. I appreciate your guys' knowledge and expertise of the series. And also because, like you guys said, you were there when it was there. So you saw the pop culture phenomenon that it was for that brief time in history. And I think we can all, as we go on this journey, discuss which Lynch film is our favorite. And even if this isn't your favorite Lynch property, this may be his magnum opus. This may be like the...
I think that, I think that's fair. And I think with most people, when you think of David Lynch, the first thing you think of is Twin Peaks. Like, I really do believe that's for the majority of people who know him. That's going to be the first thing that comes to your mind.
Well,
I agree. I agree with you, though. I felt the magnum opus. I think the return cemented that idea because the original series was more of a collaboration with more different people. There were different directors. He was only involved in a few of the episodes. But I mean, the first season he had his stamp all over regardless. But but with Fire Walk with Me and then The Return, it really does feel like this was his. You're right. I think magnum opus is a great way to describe what Twin Peaks is for David Lynch, and he's got a bunch of other stuff I love. But
yeah, and I think Kevin made an interesting point too, because we'll get into it, but Eraserhead is very more in tune to what his later movies would become. Yes. But yes. his movies leading up to this, even Blue Velvet, is pretty straightforward, even though it's kind of hitting the same points as this, because he's got Elephant Man and Dune. Those aren't as existential and weird and he
was getting sucked into the studio system.
I mean, Dune probably would have been more so if he got to make the movie he wanted to make, but compared to where his career,
those are, like you said, those are studio films, and so there's a big difference in when you're dealing with the studio, and especially someone like who was a tyrant like D. Ray De Laurentiis, he controlled everything of his films. So Eraserhead being an experimental film he basically paid for himself, that's definitely pure Lynch. And then really, I think once you get into Wild at Heart, and from that point on, you get real Lynch. With the odd, beautiful exception of The Straight Story being a Disney film, which is still weird as shit that David Lynch has a Disney film under his banner.
A G-rated Disney film. And it's beautiful.
Oh, God, it's breathtakingly good. It's so good. But after taking that out of the equation, but everything from Wild at Heart on is pretty much like what David Lynch was wanting to make. He got out of the studio system and was able to find the financiers to help him make what he wanted to make. And, we get some really amazing moments in cinema because he was able to get freed of the studio, ties. And that to me is, my favorite Lynch film remains Lost Highway. And again, talk about layers. It's got tons.
It's one of the only movies that's ever scared me.
Oh man, there's a lot going on in that movie, and it's terrifying. Mm-hmm. It's terrifying all the way through. But when you look at The Return, I think what was funny is so many people didn't know what to think of The Return. They thought it was going to be The Return to Twin Peaks, but it's not. It's a return to that universe, but that place isn't the same place anymore. You can't go home again. And that's basically the theme.
Yep.
Especially such a big gap in, it's what, 25 years?
25
Almost.
Years. I'll see you again in 25 years.
And again, another happy accident that, 25 years later was a thing in Twin Peaks in the first.
Right.
It's an amazing happy accident that's when it just worked out that The Return happened.
Yeah. Well, I think we'll see, but I look forward to discussing more with you guys with the show and just Lynch's filmography.
Yes.
Well, I hope you'll have me back for episode 2 because one of the most quintessential episodes of television in the history of TV.
Absolutely.
I'd love to talk about it. So
it is the Return season 3 episode 8 of season 1.
Yes, that's right.
We'll discuss, and if you're open, I say next time. I would normally want to do these bi-weekly, but in 2 weeks will be my birthday weekend, so I'll be out of town. Nice. But we can do the last weekend of the month, and we can cover episode 2, 3, and 4. If that sounds good.
That'd be great.
I would be out of town on Saturday, but if it's Friday or Sunday evening, I could do it.
Well, let's if this time works, let's just keep same bat time, same bat channel.
What date are we looking at?
That should be fun.
Let's see. That's going to be what the 30th.
30th. Yeah, that works for me. I'd love it. Right. That gives me time to rewatch all 3, which
yes. There's a lot.
Having an excuse to rewatch the show again is just a joy. So,
yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Well, you gentlemen have a fine night, and thank you again. And I look forward to discussing more. And Kevin, don't get lost in the red room.
I will do my best. I saw a little man in a red velvet suit who told me I could find a way out. It might be tricky, but we're gonna rock. It's gonna be great.
All right.
Well, and Cody, if your birthday's coming up, don't forget to give yourself a little present.
Oh, well, I'm probably going to get myself a couple of Criterions since it's 50% off sale.
Nice.
That's how I got my Lost Highway. So, yes.
Yeah. So, all right, guys.
Happy
Thank you
birthday.
so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. You guys have a good night. And thank you to anyone who's watching or will watch in the future. Goodbye.
Goodbye.